Hello everyone, welcome to Pete CD Vinyl World. Today I'm going to do something that I've been working on for a long time, just going through all his albums, and it's going to be a rather long ranking. It's the best to worst Alice Cooper albums. I was almost going to do this in two parts, all the originals through like say 1999 or 2000, just because he's had so many albums in the past 20 years. So it's tough to rank his catalog because it's almost like he has different eras. So I did the best I could and rank them according to the way I like them, based on which ones I'm more likely to listen to now than others. Some of the classic ones I may not have as high as some might think, but because all of his albums are overall pretty good. He's only got a couple that aren't that great. He's done everything from sort of the classic hard rock to late 70s, early 80s. He did sort of a new wave type thing, to almost bizarre music at times. The last 20 or 25 years or so, he's done more of a hard rock metal thing, but now in the last say 5 years he's gone back to like a more classic Detroit sound. But anyway, let's start off. First of all, I wanted to show you I got into Alice Cooper probably sometime in the 80s. I had heard of him and remembered him from when I was a kid, but I didn't really know any of his music. And a friend of mine who was also into Kiss had said, "Hey, do you like Alice Cooper? You should check out some of his stuff." So eventually I bought this first live album called The Live Alice Cooper Show. It's actually from the Lace and Whiskey tour. They didn't have a classic live album with the original band at the time. This is what I heard first, and has a bunch of his classic songs, so I like that. Then I think I got the greatest hits and then went from there. And so my lowest ranked album, I think I counted 28 studio albums. So he's got a pretty big catalog. I'm actually going with his latest one, Detroit Stories. And I know a lot of people loved this album when it came out because it's like that raw rock and roll sound. But to me, Alice now tries to go around saying that they're like this Detroit band and blah, blah, blah. They were really an LA band. They might have came from that area, but they were glam. They were LA. And this album is just a little too stripped down and basic rock and roll for me. It's not much as far as like the horror or creepy stuff. That's what I like more of the Alice Cooper. It's produced by Bob Ezrin, but it really sounds like it was recorded in a home studio. I mean, they put it out on a double 45 RPM vinyl, and it's not an audiophile album. I mean, I don't know why they do that. But overall, it's pretty good. They do a predictable cover of rock and roll from Lou Reed or the Velvet Underground. I would say the best song on here definitely is We're All Hanging On by a Thread. That's probably the best song. They redo the song Detroit City, which was on, I think, the Eyes of Alice Cooper. I don't know why. The original is better. But anyway, still a good album. I wouldn't say he has any bad or terrible albums in his whole catalog, so that's a pretty good thing. Like I said, these are rankings based on what I like. Nothing definitive or, Next up, another album which a lot of people love, but this is one out of those four dark period albums is the one I could never really get that much into, was Zipper Catches Skin. I do like the other three, and they're further up my ranking, but this one just didn't grab me as that as good as the others. It's not really that weird. It's not really anything. It's just sort of there. Zorro's Ascent is okay. The best song probably is Tag You're It. That's a pretty good, almost like a horror. It takes you through like a horror movie. That's pretty good. It has the song I Am the Future, which was the theme song to a movie called Class of 84, if anyone remembers that. But the rest of it is just sort of like the bad songs that are on, like, say, Special Forces or Flush the Fashion. Just okay. Next up, another album I was not that impressed with when it came out. I believe this was produced by Bob Ezrin also. Welcome to My Nightmare, the second one or the sequel. This one suffers, I think. It's just too many guests on it, and there's even like some songs that have the remaining members of the original band on here, but when you hear those songs, they don't sound like the original band. You would never think he has them on these like weird tracks that you would never think are from the original band. Like I said, I don't think any of the songs are too bad. It's just nothing like overwhelming. I think if he was going to do a sequel to that album, which is one of his classics and one of my favorites, he should have really maybe got Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter back to sort of get that lineup back together and co-write with Bob Ezrin, see what they came up with. I just wasn't too impressed with the songs on this one. Up next is another favorite, and it's 1978's From the Inside. It's sort of like a concept album of Alice when he went into sort of like, I guess like a mental facility rather than a rehab to get over alcoholism. And it's produced by David Foster, so it's got a real thick, glossy sound. Probably his best sounding album up until this point. Steve Lukather plays guitar on this actually, so the guitars sound really good, along with Davey Johnstone. Bernie Taupin helped him on a lot of this album, songwriting wise, so it's got like an Elton John feel. But to me, there's just way too many ballads, and the songs don't have like those catchy hooks like a lot of Alice Cooper has. The first song on each side, From the Inside and Serious, are probably the two best songs on the album. How You Gonna See Me Now was another ballad that was a top 10 hit for him. At this point, he had 4 albums in a row that had a ballad that made the top 10. So I think he was getting more known as this sort of weird balladeer rather than this horror shock guy. Sort of like when he really became Hollywood Alice. I think he was on the Muppets at this point. But a lot of fans rank this in the top 5 of his albums. But to me, it's just okay. Not one I listen to that often, except the couple tracks I really like. Next up, the follow-up to Welcome to My Nightmare, Goes to Hell. Title track is a classic, of course. Guilty is a pretty good song. Wish You Were Here is a pretty good song. There's some actual like disco stuff on here, like You Gotta Dance and Didn't We Meet. Really a disappointing follow-up to Welcome to My Nightmare, I think. The only thing about this album is it sounds really good. Probably one of the best produced albums he has of the 70s. It's kind of odd how Ezrin had like an inconsistent sound with Alice. I don't particularly think his production on Alice's albums is really that great. I think a lot of them actually sound kind of flat compared to his other productions like Kiss Destroyer or Revenge or Pink Floyd The Wall or something. I mean, so I don't know. But it's got that lineup of Welcome to My Nightmare, Dick Wagner, Steve Hunter. Alan Schwartzberg plays drums on here. But again, it's not a bad album. It's just not one of my favorites. Coming up next, I'm going to rank their second album, Easy Action. After their bizarre first one, they sort of settled into more song structure and some normal type songs. This is definitely, you can hear where the sound of the original band develops from here. Mr. and Misdemeanor is a pretty good song. Return to the Spiders, Lay Down and Die Goodbye. There's a couple songs actually sung by, I think, Dennis Dunaway. Which are pretty... I'm sorry, Michael Bruce, the guitar player. But yeah, it's an okay album. Nothing spectacular. A lot of people think the first two are really bizarre. I don't really think they're that out there. And then the first one I'm going to rank next, Pretty's for You. This one is their sort of psychedelic album. It's definitely bizarre at some point, and that's the only way to describe it. It's funny, if they had only put out this album and say the first one, all of these guys like Noble Records and all these guys that are into psych, they would be like, oh, this is the greatest psych album you've never heard, and blah blah blah, because it is a good psych album. It's just not indicative of what they became. But I don't think it's as weird as people think or say it is. It was on Frank Zappa's label at the time. But, after the first two albums, I don't think any of those songs ever were played again live, as far as I know. But it's definitely worth listening to. Next up, I'm going to list Special Forces. This is the second out of his Blackout Period albums, and the last one he did tour for this. This was when he was sort of in that military garb with the female makeup on. It's kind of a bizarre period for him. Who Do You Think You Are was a pretty good opening track. He does a cover of 7 and 7 Is, and redoes Generation Landslide from Billion Dollar Babies. Pretty good version of it, actually. It's live. But overall, this is a pretty good album. I wouldn't say it's anything really bizarre. It's just sort of new wave / rock. More on the rock side than, say, Flush the Fashion. But it's a pretty good one. Next up, Hey Stupid. Real good sounding, solid album. I think this is 91? Yeah, so this is just getting out of the hair metal era into grunge. It's not as hair metal-ish as Trash. But I don't think it's just very memorable as far as the songs. Every song of the album is good. There's just nothing that memorable except the title track and Feed My Frankenstein. Got a lot of guest stars on here. I think Joe Satriani / play on a lot of stuff. But pretty solid album there. Next up, I'm going to rank Lace and Whiskey. To me, one of his underrated albums. Definitely way better than Goes to Hell. It's Hot Tonight, Lace and Whiskey, Road Rats, all pretty heavy songs. Had another hit on here with You and Me, a top 10 ballad. Just sort of a forgotten about album. He at this point is sort of like this private investigator. I don't really understand the concept there, but doesn't really have a concept overall as far as lyrically. But overall, probably it's just a good solid album. Next up, I'm ranking one that people are going to be surprised I'm ranking this low is School's Out. Just nothing really grabbed me on this album. The title track, of course, is a classic. Everyone knows that. All the other songs are pretty just run-of-the-mill. This album, to me, sounds like the actual follow-up to their second one, Easy Action. It's funny how this one came out a couple albums. They made 3 albums in between. But it just reminds me of that album as far as the songwriting and the production. Gutter Cats versus the Jets from... What was that play? That's from... West Side Story. That's a pretty good. That's probably the most well-known song besides School's Out on here. Alma Mater's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool album if you listen to it all the way through, but just if you pick out the tracks, there's nothing like special about it. In fact, I don't even know that even at the time they played too many of these songs live. I think they played Looney Tune maybe and Gutter Cats versus the Jets. But yeah, that's that one. Next up, Constrictor, sort of his comeback album. It's from 1986. Had a sort of a MTV hit with He's Back, the Man Behind the Mask from Friday the 13th, Part 6. Teenage Frankenstein is the one he plays still from time to time. This has Kane Roberts on lead guitar. This one's sort of grouped together with Raise Your Fist and Yell. Sort of like their horror shock metal albums. But this one, the production's real flat on, so that's another reason I'm knocking it down. But I remember when I had this when it was out, and it was I listened to it a lot. I think it's one of those over time where the production just dates it, and it's not that great. But he did have a pretty good comeback with this. Next up, I'm ranking his 1980 album, Flush the Fashion, the first of his sort of blackout period, even though he did tour for this. Very new wave-ish. The hit or semi-hit on here was a song called Clones, which is sort of almost sounds like the song Cars from Gary Newman. Has that sort of feel. The whole album. It was produced by Roy Thomas Baker, so it has that Cars feel as well. But overall, it's a pretty good album. I wouldn't say there's anything on here that's... The song Pain, which is a sort of a mid-tempo ballad, that song's been brought back from time to time. Sort of a... Not a hit, but it was in that movie Roadie as well. So at the time, this is what he looked like. And he carried that look through Special Forces, but just started wearing military garb. So, kind of odd. Next up is these mid-90s album, Last Temptation. This was a follow-up to Hey Stupid, and came out in 94. Again, had a sort of a semi-hit with Lost in America. At this point, he's back to, I wouldn't say a classic sound, but it's sort of his classic sound combined with more of a grungier sound. Slideshow could have been a song on the original bands, one of the original bands lineup. You're My Temptation probably is the best song I feel on here. Unholy War is a pretty good song. But this is Alice is sort of getting back to really concentrating on the songwriting aspect of it. I don't really think it has a concept overall. They did have a comic book at the time that this was out, but overall it's definitely a well-produced, well-sounding album. It's funny how he didn't have that many albums out in the 90s, but then all of a sudden the 2000s came and he had 20 albums or so. Next up, the follow-up to Constrictor, Raise Your Fist and Yell. I was a pretty big fan of this album when it came out. Freedom, much heavier than that album, and not hair metalish at all. To me, this is that shock horror metal, I would say. Prince of Darkness, I would say, and Roses on White Lace and Freedom are the three standout tracks for me. This also has Kane Roberts, and I didn't mention it, but Constrictor and Raise Your Fist and Yell also have Kip Winger on bass before he went on to form Winger. And if you watch that or the Return of Alice Cooper home video from the Constrictor tour, Kip Winger's on there too. Next up, Dragontown. This is the follow-up to Brutal Planet. When I first heard this, I wasn't impressed with it at all, but recently I've been listening to it, and I think it's actually a really solid album. Sort of an underrated album, because I guess there wasn't really a standout hit or single he released from this. But well-produced. It's sort of... Brutal Planet and this one sort of go together. He sort of makes these two album pairs in a way. More on the... I don't want to say they're industrial sounding, but as industrial as Alice gets, the guitars and stuff. But yeah, definitely I think it was supposed to be another concept album, but I'm not exactly sure what the concept was. Next up, Muscle of Love. This was the last album made with the original lineup, and definitely an underrated album. I actually... If I'm going to listen to any of them, I would probably put this on, because you don't hear these songs a lot as well, Muscle of Love, the title track, was the standout song. Hard Hearted Alice is pretty good. Man with a Golden Gun, Big Apple Dreamin'. Working Up a Sweat. I mean, every song on here is pretty good. I don't know why Bob Ezrin left and didn't want to produce it. I mean, way better albums than, say, School's Out, in my opinion. Or some of the other later produced Ezrin albums like Goes to Hell or Lace and Whiskey. So, Yeah, this is definitely an underrated album if you can pick this up. This came originally in this big cardboard box packaging with the LP. Up next, Along Came a Spider. Pretty good concept album. Sort of, he has like a 2-album series where he's more of like the serial killer Alice. So this is more of like getting into the shock horror, but more modern sounding, but really good album from start to finish. Vengeance is Mine is probably the standout track on here. But yeah, all of these later albums are definitely worth getting. And like I said, it was hard to rank this catalog, so a lot of mine are sort of grouped together, except for like my top 5 favorites. So up next, I'm ranking Dirty Diamonds. Women of Mass Destruction, Dirty Diamonds, the title track, are still songs he plays from time to time. Sort of now he's into like this just straight ahead rock and roll Detroit sound. I think it works on here where it doesn't work on his latest album, Detroit Stories. I think all of these songs are really good. So he's definitely in a groove here in the early 2000s. And following that up, Eyes of Alice Cooper. Between High School and the Old School is one of my favorite songs he's made in the past 25, 30 years. Detroit City, What Do You Want From Me? So all of these later albums have like 3, 4, 5 real killer tracks on them, and the rest of them are good also. It's crazy how he released so many albums that have so many good songs lately. But yeah, definitely pick this up. And my favorite one out of sort of the last few or last 5 or 6 is Paranormal. This is really where it all comes together for me as far as like the horror killer, serial killer, and heavy Alice. Paranormal song. The title track is good. Holy Water. Is this produced by Alice Cooper? Yeah, it is. I mean, produced by Bob Ezrin. So, in my opinion, this is one of the best Ezrin productions as far as like sound quality. It also comes with a second disc. I don't know if all of them do. Mine does. That has the original remaining band, and they do a mini set. And it's got 2 new songs with them on it. Great, Genuine American Girl and You and All Your Friends. Those songs are actually really good. So I don't know why he just isn't. I think now they're actually making an album together. As it's better than having these guys just play here and there on an album, like 1 or 2 songs, and no one even knows that they're on it. So, but I definitely highly recommend getting that one. And this is now, what are we? Top 1, 2, 3. Top 7. So these are my favorite 7. And I know a lot of people don't like this album, but I think it's really good as far as songwriting and performance, and that's Trash. Produced by Desmond Child. So a lot of people say Alice was hair metal between, say, Constrictor and Hey Stupid. To me, this is really his only true quote-unquote hair metal, but it's still a little bit heavier than that. Of course, Poison was a huge hit, but the album goes on from there, and it's solid track after solid track. Spark in the Dark, Bed of Nails, Hell is Living Without You, I'm Your Gun. A lot of songs were written by outside songwriters like John Bon Jovi, Steven Tyler, but really solid album. If you can get past sort of the 80s production, and Desmond Child produced it and co-wrote a lot of stuff on here, so definitely great. Next up, Brutal Planet. This one came out, I believe, 2000. So this is where Alice really gets into that real heavy modern sound. I would say borderline industrial on some tracks, just the guitars. But no fake drums or anything like that. The title track is awesome. Blow Me a Kiss, Pick Up the Bones, It's the Little Things. A lot of really strong tracks on here. A lot of people don't know about this album either. I would definitely recommend that. Coming up next is Dada, perhaps his most bizarre and out there album. It's the fourth one out of the Blackout period. No promotion for this at all. There's no like TV appearances, no commercials, nothing about this album when it came out. It's not bizarre musically. It's just sort of straight ahead rock. Dick Wagner plays guitar on it. Bob Ezrin produces it. Let me think here. So, I Am America is sort of like a comical song. It's very similar to Lost in America in a way. Surprised that wasn't like made into a video. This was 1983, so videos were just becoming the thing then. Pass the Gun Around. It was kind of a weird one. Formerly Warmer. You just have to hear this album to describe it, but some people love it or hate it. I think Pete Pardo on Sea of Tranquility actually ranked this lowest in his catalog, which I cannot believe. How do you like, Goes to Hell or some of these others better than this? But it's an album you have to hear if you're a fan of his. So we're down to the top 4 now, and up is $1 Billion Babies. I think every song on here, except maybe one or two, Marianne and Unfinished Sweet, are well-known hits. Hello Hooray, Raped and Freezing, Elected, $1 Billion Babies, No More Mr. Nice Guy. Probably the best produced, I think, out of the original albums from the original band. Other than that, you can't go wrong with this. Even if you're not a huge Alice fan, you should definitely have this in your collection. Next up, so this is my top 3 coming up, is his first solo album, Welcome to My Nightmare. I would have probably ranked this number 1 up to a few years ago because I listened to this album a lot early on when I was a fan of his. Definitely a sort of a storyline / concept album. Welcome to My Nightmare, Black Widow, Only Women Bleed, another ballad that was a hit, Department of Youth, Cold Ethel, The Awakening, and then finally Escape. I mean, all these songs are well known. He pretty much played this album in its entirety on the tour, which was pretty cool. It had a huge stage show. Vincent Price even does some voiceover on here. Definitely a cool album I used to listen to at night in the dark. A lot of people think this is too Hollywoodish or sort of like this is the last one they stayed with him on. It's sort of when he became a megastar. And in contrast to that, number 2, Killer. Probably out of the original lineup albums, his most evil sounding or most rocking. You can tell on here he goes from this Alice to this album Alice only in a few years. So but yeah, what's on here? Under My Wheels, Killer, Be My Lover, Desperado, You Drive Me Nervous, one of his unsung hits from, not hits, but well-known songs from back in the day. So you definitely have to have that if you're an Alice fan. Love It to Death is my number 1. I think this album, every song on here is killer. Caught in a Dream. Even some of the lesser known songs like Caught in a Dream, Long Way to Go, Hallowed Be My Name, Sun or Rise, Black Juju. This is their first major labor one after Easy Action, and that's my number 1. So I think this video got in right in a half hour. So if you're an Alice fan, let me know what your top 5 or top 10 are. I also highly recommend his box set, Life and Crimes of Alice Cooper. Only was released on CD, but who cares? Because you don't need everything on vinyl, right? And so this one is cool because it sort of wraps up all of his B-sides and soundtrack appearances all into one set, along with everything you would expect from his albums and a lot of early demos, things like that. So highly recommend that. I think it's out of print, so you got to get it on eBay or whatever. But if you like these videos, please subscribe, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks.